My best friend mocked my girlfriend's looks, got what he deserved, and now wants me to feel sorry for him. I, 28 male, have been best friends with Josh, 28 male, since we were kids. We grew up on the same street, went to the same schools, and even ended up working in the same industry. He's always been the kind of guy who thinks he's the funniest person in the room, sarcastic, quick-witted, and the type to make jokes at other people's expense. Most of the time, I let it slide. That's just how he is, and I've always told myself he doesn't mean any harm. But recently, he said something that completely changed the way I see him, and now I don't know if I can just brush it off like I used to. A few weeks ago, I introduced my girlfriend Emily, 27 female, to our friend group. We've been dating for about 6 months, and I really like her. She's smart, kind, and honestly, one of the most genuine people I've ever met. She's also a little shy in new environments, so I was hoping my friends would be welcoming. For the most part, they were. But Josh? The moment he saw her, he gave me this weird smirk. At first, I didn't think much of it. Later that night, though, when Emily stepped away for a moment, he leaned in and said something that made my stomach drop. He smirked and told me that he thought I had higher standards. At first, I thought I misheard him. I just stared at him for a second, waiting for him to laugh or say he was joking. But he didn't. He just took a sip of his drink like he hadn't just completely disrespected my girlfriend. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my cool. I asked him what the hell he meant by that, and he just shrugged, saying that she was nice and all, but not really my usual type. He even had the audacity to nudge me like we were sharing some kind of inside joke. I was fuming, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of everyone. I just told him that it was a messed up thing to say and walked away. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to understand what the hell he was thinking. Emily didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, and I didn't want to ruin her night, so I acted normal. But inside? I was boiling. I couldn't believe my best friend, someone I've known my whole life, would be so casually cruel about someone I care about. The next day, I tried to let it go. Maybe he had too much to drink. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't some harmless joke, he had straight up disrespected Emily, and by extension, me. So I texted him and said we needed to talk. When we met up, I didn't waste time. I told him that what he said about Emily was out of line and that I wasn't going to pretend it didn't bother me. He rolled his eyes and told me that I was being too sensitive. He said that it was just a joke and that I should know by now that he doesn't have a filter. Then he laughed and said that if I was really that upset, I must be whipped. That pissed me off even more. I told him that this wasn't about me being whipped or sensitive, it was about basic respect. He just sighed and told me that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that Emily probably didn't even care, and that I should just let it go. I told him that it wasn't up to him to decide what was a big deal or not. I said that whether Emily knew about it or not, it didn't change the fact that he had crossed a line. He leaned back and told me that I was acting like this was some kind of betrayal, when in reality, he was just being honest. He said that he didn't find Emily attractive and thought I could do better, and that if I couldn't handle a little honesty, that was my problem, not his. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a single comment, it was about how he saw me and my relationship. He didn't respect Emily, and by extension, he didn't respect me. I told him that if this was his idea of honesty, then I didn't want it. I said that a real friend wouldn't feel the need to tear down someone I care about, just to get a laugh. He just scoffed and told me that I was blowing things out of proportion. He said that I needed to chill out and not take things so personally. I felt something snap inside me. I told him that it was personal. He insulted my girlfriend to my face and expected me to just laugh it off. I asked him if he would have been okay with me saying something cruel about a girl he was dating. He shrugged and told me that he wouldn't care because he doesn't put his self-worth in what other people think. That was such a bullshit excuse. It wasn't about self-worth, it was about respect. I told him that his words had consequences, whether he liked it or not. He sighed and told me that I was making things awkward for no reason. He said that we'd been friends for years and that I should know by now that he doesn't mean half the stuff he says. But that was exactly the problem, he never meant it, but somehow, he always managed to say the most hurtful things. And this time, I wasn't just going to let it slide. I told him that I was done excusing his behavior and that if he couldn't understand why this was a big deal, maybe we weren't as good of friends as I thought. He laughed, but there was this nervous edge to it, like he wasn't expecting me to actually stand my ground. He told me that I was being dramatic and acting like I was ending our friendship over something stupid. I told him that it wasn't stupid to me. I said that for years, I let his jokes slide, even when they were at my expense, because I thought that was just who he was. But now, I was realizing that who he was might just be someone who didn't respect me or the people I care about. That seemed to get to him, at least a little. He sighed and told me that he didn't mean to offend me, that he was just messing around, and that I should have known that. But I told him that if he really didn't mean it, then apologizing shouldn't be that hard. He looked at me for a second, like he was actually considering it, but then he shook his head and told me that I was being ridiculous. He said that if I wanted to throw away years of friendship over a joke, that was on me. That was the moment I knew we were done. I had given him every opportunity to own up to what he said, to at least pretend that he understood why it bothered me. But instead, he doubled down. He would rather lose a friendship than admit he was wrong. And honestly, that told me everything I needed to know. I stood up and told him that I wasn't throwing away anything, he was. I told him that friendships change and people grow up. But if he wanted to stay stuck in this mindset where he could say whatever he wanted without consequences, that was his choice. I wasn't going to keep making excuses for him. He just rolled his eyes and muttered something about me being too soft as I walked away. That was the last time we talked. At first, I wondered if I had overreacted. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I should have just brushed it off, like I had 100 times before. But then I thought about Emily, about how she had done nothing wrong, how she had just walked into that room expecting to meet my friends, and how one of them had immediately decided she wasn't good enough for me. And worse, he thought he had the right to say it out loud like his opinion mattered more than my feelings for her. That's when I knew I made the right choice. Because if I let this slide, what would be next? Would he start making more comments? Would he make Emily uncomfortable every time we all hung out? Would I have to choose between defending her and keeping the peace with him? That wasn't a friendship I wanted anymore. I realized that I had spent years laughing at his jokes, ignoring the little jabs, convincing myself that it was just how he was. But I wasn't a kid anymore. I didn't have to put up with that. Over the next few weeks, Josh didn't reach out, and honestly, I didn't expect him to. But what surprised me was how little I missed him. Sure, we had history, but history doesn't mean much when the person you've known for years refuses to grow with you. I didn't tell Emily about what happened right away. I guess part of me didn't want to make her feel bad or like she was the reason for the fallout. But eventually, I did. When I told her, she just stared at me for a moment, then said that she never really felt comfortable around Josh to begin with. She told me that she always got this vibe from him, like he was sizing her up, like she was being silently judged. And that hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about what he said, it was about the fact that Emily felt it, even before I realized it myself. I told her that I wasn't going to be hanging out with him anymore, and she just nodded, like she already knew that was the right call. After that conversation, something shifted in me. I always thought losing a best friend would feel like a huge, painful event, like something I'd struggle with for months. But in reality, it felt like a weight off my shoulders. I didn't have to deal with his passive-aggressive comments, his so-called honest opinions that were really just excuses to tear people down. I realized I had been holding on to that friendship out of habit, not because it actually added anything good to my life. A few weeks later, I ran into some mutual friends who mentioned that Josh had been talking about me. They told me that he was making it sound like I was the one who overreacted, that I had turned my back on him over a stupid joke. One of them even asked me why I was taking it so seriously. I just shrugged and told them that respect isn't a joke to me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself beyond that. It didn't take long for Josh to reach out again, but not in the way I expected. He didn't apologize, didn't ask to talk things out, he just sent me a message saying that I was being petty and that he hoped I would get over it soon. That was all I needed to see. He wasn't reaching out because he missed our friendship or because he realized he was wrong. He just wanted to brush everything under the rug, like he always did. I didn't reply. I didn't even feel the urge to. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just done. I had spent too many years letting things slide, pretending that his words didn't get to me, convincing myself that it was just his personality. But now I saw it for what it was. Some people don't grow. Some people don't think they need to. And I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to change someone who didn't even think he had a problem. Cutting Josh out of my life wasn't some dramatic moment, it was just a quiet decision that made my life better. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to come. I stopped justifying his behavior to myself. And most importantly, I stopped surrounding myself with people who thought respect was optional. Emily never asked me to choose between her and my friendship with Josh, but in the end, the choice made itself. She made me realize that the people in my life should lift me up, not drag me down. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was surrounding myself with people who actually respected me. So now I have to ask, was I wrong for cutting him off? Was I really being too sensitive like he said, or did I just finally set a boundary I should have set a long time ago? A few months passed, and honestly, I barely thought about Josh anymore. Life felt lighter without him around, and I didn't regret cutting him off. But then, out of nowhere, I got a message from a mutual friend. It was just a short text, "Dude, you won't believe what happened to Josh." I ignored it at first. I didn't care. Whatever drama he had going on wasn't my problem anymore. But then another friend texted. And another. Until finally, curiosity got the best of me. I asked what was going on, and the response made my stomach drop. He ran his mouth to the wrong guy, and let's just say, it didn't end well for him. From what I pieced together, it happened at a bar a few nights ago. Josh was being Josh, drunk, cocky, thinking he was the funniest guy in the room. But instead of making his usual digs at a close friend, he decided to mouth off to some stranger. A guy who, apparently, didn't take kindly to being insulted. And unlike me, this guy didn't just walk away. Josh made some nasty comment about the guy's girlfriend, something about her weight, the way she looked. Just like he did with Emily. Except instead of laughing it off or telling Josh he was being an asshole, the guy stood up, got in his face, and knocked him flat on his ass. One punch. Right in the middle of the bar, in front of everyone. The way they described it, Josh didn't even have time to react. 1 second, he was smirking, thinking he was being clever. The next, he was on the floor, holding his jaw, completely stunned. Apparently, the guy didn't even stick around to gloat, just told him to watch his mouth and walked off like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Josh just sat there, humiliated, bleeding from his lip, and too shocked to say a word. Hearing about it, I should have felt bad. We've been friends for years, and a part of me thought I'd have some kind of sympathy for him. But honestly, I didn't. If anything, I felt a weird sense of validation. I had spent so long excusing his behavior, convincing myself that he wasn't that bad. But here was proof, solid, undeniable proof, that it wasn't just me. He was a jerk. And sooner or later, being a jerk catches up to you. After hearing the story, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the first time something like this had happened to him? Or had there been other moments, other people, who just didn't bother sticking around to tell the story? I always assumed I was just being too sensitive, that Josh's jokes were harmless, that he didn't really mean the things he said. But now I saw him for what he was, someone who had spent years pushing boundaries, testing people's patience, and finally, he pushed the wrong person. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't check in to see if he was okay. And not because I wanted to see him suffer, but because I knew that if I did, he would just brush it off. He'd spin the story to make himself the victim, say the guy couldn't take a joke or that it was all just a misunderstanding. He would never admit that maybe, just maybe, he had finally faced the consequences of his own behavior. A few days later, I ran into one of our mutual friends, Mark, who had been at the bar that night. He wasted no time bringing it up, saying that Josh was still pissed about it, walking around with a bruised jaw and an even bigger bruised ego. But what really caught my attention was what Mark said next. He told me that after the fight, instead of owning up to what he did, Josh started ranting about how people are too soft these days, how no one can take a joke anymore. But the weirdest part? No one was agreeing with him. Mark said that usually, in situations like this, Josh would have people laughing along, egging him on, but this time? People just stared at him. Someone even told him, straight up, maybe it's not that people are too sensitive, maybe you're just an asshole. And that? That hit me harder than anything else. Because it meant that I wasn't crazy. It wasn't just me who saw through his bullshit. Other people were finally seeing it too. That night, I thought about all the times I let Josh's words slide. All the moments I convinced myself that he didn't mean it or that it wasn't worth making a big deal over. And I realized something: I had been enabling him just like everyone else. Maybe if someone had called him out earlier, really made him face what he was doing, he wouldn't have ended up here. But instead, he got comfortable. Comfortable with people laughing along, brushing it off, letting him think that being an asshole with a sense of humor was the same thing as being funny. But now, the cracks were starting to show. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't taking his side. And for the first time in his life, he had no choice but to sit with the fact that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as untouchable as he thought he was. A week later, I got one last message from Josh. Short. No apologies. No real acknowledgement. Just, guess you were right after all. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He got what he deserved.